The night that shocked the rock world. It was a warm summer night in Los Angeles, 1974. The stars were out, but none of them could outshine what was about to happen behind closed doors. Led Zeppelin had just wrapped up one of their most explosive shows. The band was on top of the world. Every stadium they entered shook with screams. Every album they dropped became legend. But none of that could prepare them for the moment they got a message backstage: "Elvis Presley wants to meet you." Robert Plant froze. It was like time stopped. This wasn't just anyone. This was the king. The man who made Robert fall in love with music in the first place. The man who brought fire to rock and roll before Zeppelin ever plugged in a guitar. And now, he wanted to meet them? Jimmy Page looked at Plant with a grin. Bonham was already halfway to the limo. Even John Paul Jones cracked a rare smile. They all knew. This wasn't just a fan moment. This was history waiting to happen. When they arrived at Elvis's hotel suite, security was tight. Not even rock royalty got past without a search. The king didn't take chances. But once they were in, everything changed. Elvis stood there, calm but curious. Dressed in his signature jumpsuit, he gave them that famous crooked smile. He looked right at Plant and said, "So you're the one they say sings like me." Robert chuckled nervously. "Well, maybe I just listened to you too much as a kid." Elvis walked closer. For a second, it was like two worlds were colliding, the new gods of rock meeting the original legend. The energy was strange. It was almost tense. But then Elvis did something unexpected. He started singing. A low, deep hum. The first few lines of "Love Me." Plant didn't even think. He joined in. Their voices wrapped around each other. One old and smooth. One young and wild. For that moment, there was no competition. No ego. Just music. Jimmy Page said later it was one of the strangest and most beautiful things he'd ever seen. But what came next would leave Plant shaken. After the short duet, Elvis leaned in and said, "You know, I've been watching you boys. You've got fire. But remember, it's not just about noise. It's about the soul. Don't lose that." Those words stuck in Plant's head for decades. Because when the king talks, you listen. But that night wasn't over. Not even close. Elvis had one more surprise for Led Zeppelin. Something none of them expected. And it started with a private invite and a mysterious smile. Because the king had questions. Real questions. And Robert Plant wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers. Elvis had questions, and Robert Plant froze. Back in Elvis's private suite, the room dimmed slightly as a member of his staff closed the blinds. The crowd of handlers melted into the shadows, and it suddenly felt like Robert Plant had stepped out of the real world and into something timeless. Elvis turned to him and said, "You boys don't rehearse much, do you?" Plant laughed awkwardly, unsure if it was a joke or criticism. Jimmy Page stepped in, cool and calm. "We feed off the crowd. Each show's a little different. Keeps it alive." Elvis nodded slowly. Dangerous way to live, but exciting. "I did it too. Until Vegas." Then he looked Plant straight in the eyes. "Do you ever get tired of being a god?" The room went silent. Robert didn't know how to answer. How could he? What do you say when the man who shaped modern music calls you a god, then warns you about it? "I don't feel like one," Plant said, carefully. "We're just trying to keep the flame burning. That's all." Elvis smiled again, but it was sad now. Flames burn out, Robert. That's the problem. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a warning. And it hit Robert harder than he wanted to admit. The king wasn't talking about music. He was talking about life. About fame. About losing pieces of yourself for the sake of the crowd. That's when Elvis opened a drawer near the bar and pulled out a photo. It was of his mother. "She used to tell me, 'Don't let the world take your voice.' I thought she meant singing. But she meant more than that." Robert glanced at Jimmy. Even Bonham looked serious now. The whole mood had shifted. The night that started with excitement and starstruck was now something else. Elvis turned back and asked, "You love what you do?" Plant nodded. "With everything." "Then protect it. Because one day, people stop asking what you think. They'll just tell you what you are." It wasn't showbiz advice. It was spiritual survival. But then, as if someone flipped a switch, Elvis clapped his hands. "All right, enough of that. Let's loosen up a little." He walked over to the stereo and played one of his favorite records, an old blues track, and to everyone's shock, he started dancing. Not the polished Elvis from the movies. This was raw. Just a man moving to the beat, shaking off the weight of the world. Plant couldn't help but join in. The rest of Zeppelin followed. There they were, icons of British rock, dancing in a Vegas suite with the king of rock and roll. And for a moment, it felt like the world made sense. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed, Elvis leaned in one last time with a whisper that Robert Plant never repeated publicly. Something personal. Something haunting. And it would come back years later, when Led Zeppelin fell apart. The sun had just begun to rise over Las Vegas, painting golden streaks across the hotel windows. The party was long over, the laughter faded, and most of the room had emptied. Only a few people remained: Elvis, Robert Plant, and silence. Plant leaned back in his chair, still trying to process everything Elvis had said. Then, the king leaned forward and whispered something in his ear. No one else heard it. Not Page. Not Bonham. Not even the guards. Later, Plant would describe it only as something deeply personal, a warning from one soul to another. That moment would stick with him forever. Years later, when Led Zeppelin's world came crashing down after John Bonham's sudden death, Plant remembered that whisper. The band broke apart, unable to continue. The godlike image they'd built came crumbling down. And Plant? He withdrew. Fans begged for a reunion. The world demanded more Zeppelin. But Robert wasn't interested in being a god anymore. He'd seen what it did to Elvis. How the weight of the crown could crush even the king. In the early 80s, Plant started doing solo work. Not for the charts. Not for fame. But for something more real. Something Elvis had hinted at that night. He was trying to protect his voice. But the past never disappears completely. Years after Elvis passed, Robert was asked in an interview, what was it like meeting the king? He smiled and said, it was like meeting my future, in a mirror I wasn't ready to look into. And yet, that mirror never cracked. In 2007, Led Zeppelin reunited for one final, legendary concert in London. It was raw. It was tight. And Plant, standing before the crowd, didn't scream like before. He sang, with control, with feeling, with soul. Almost as if Elvis was still watching. After the show, a reporter asked him why he didn't want to tour with the band again. Plant looked away and said, because I remember what he told me. That whisper. That night. That warning. No one knows exactly what Elvis said to him. Maybe it was about staying human in a world that worships idols. Maybe it was about losing yourself in applause. Or maybe it was simply, don't become me. Whatever it was, it stayed with Robert Plant forever. It changed how he sang, how he lived, and how he remembered the king. Two legends met that night, one on his way down, the other on his way up. But in that quiet, unforgettable moment, they were just two men, trying to hold on to their voices. And somehow, in the noise of the world, they found each other. That's the story no one tells. But Robert Plant will never forget it. Years passed, but Robert Plant never spoke of that night in full. Not in interviews. Not in memoirs. What happened in that Vegas suite remained sacred, a private memory between two men forever changed by fame. Still, whispers followed him. Some said Elvis warned him about the industry. Others believed the king had confessed a regret so deep, it rattled Plant to his core. But Robert carried that mystery with grace, never revealing the full truth, only letting the music speak. In 1998, decades after that fateful meeting, Plant was asked during a BBC radio interview, do you miss the Led Zeppelin days? He paused. I miss the power, he said. But I don't miss the illusion. Elvis taught me that. That statement alone was enough to send shockwaves through the rock world. Had the king of rock and roll peeled back the curtain for the golden-haired god of Zeppelin? In many ways, Plant's entire solo career, the sudden left turns, the refusal to chase trends, the rawness, could be traced back to that conversation. Even during the Zeppelin reunion in 2007, Plant held firm. One night only. No tour. No nostalgia act. He sang like a man who had made peace with his past. Offstage, he confessed to friends that he could still hear Elvis's voice. Not the songs, the man. The soul behind the icon. It was a reminder, music wasn't about worship. It was about truth. And so, Robert Plant kept chasing that truth, in African rhythms, in quiet ballads, in the spaces between applause. He turned down millions for more Zeppelin tours. Fans were confused. The media called him difficult. But Plant remained calm. Because he hadn't forgotten the lesson he learned in that hotel suite. The story of when Led Zeppelin met Elvis isn't just about legends crossing paths. It's about a torch being passed, not of fame, but of wisdom. And maybe that's why Robert Plant still sings with such fire today. Because he never let the world steal his voice. Just like the king told him. Robert Plant once said, I carry my heroes with me. And of all the rock giants he admired, none left a deeper, more personal mark than Elvis Presley. Years after Elvis's death, Robert made a quiet visit to Graceland. No camera crews. No headlines. Just one man standing outside the house of another whose shadow still stretched across his life. A tour guide recognized him. Mr. Plant, would you like a private tour? Robert declined. He didn't need to see the gold records or the famous jumpsuits. He wasn't there for the icon. He was there for the man. He stood silently by the meditation garden where Elvis was buried. For a moment, the flamboyant frontman of Led Zeppelin was just Robert, reflective, calm, even mournful. Later, someone asked him what he thought of Graceland. "I didn't go to see a place," he replied. "I went to remember a moment." That moment, decades earlier in Las Vegas, still echoed. The laughter. The whispers. The warning. Some say Plant's refusal to chase a Zeppelin reunion was selfish. But maybe it was sacred. He once told a friend, "If I go back to being that man, I might forget who I am." Elvis had shown him the cost of forgetting. So Plant chose the long road, the road of reinvention. He sang with Alison Krauss. He played intimate stages. He explored world music, not because it was expected, but because it was honest. And through it all, he stayed true to what the king had taught him: protect the soul behind the song. Today, Robert Plant is more than a rock god. He's a survivor. Not just of the 70s chaos, but of the pressure that fame demands. In many ways, he became what Elvis couldn't, a legend who still belonged to himself. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful legacy of their meeting. One night. One whisper. One voice that changed another forever. Elvis Presley may have left the building, but he never left Robert Plant's heart.